Patrick Cook here. How you doing today? So I'm a photographer and have been since my teens. And I'm an amateur, probably an advanced amateur. And I've always enjoyed the various concepts of photography and the creative things that you can do with it. And I've also enjoyed teaching photography. One is my infrared course up on Udemy. So I also enjoy games, 3D games. I've been involved with 3D gaming as a player for as long as I can remember. I'm not an avid gamer, but I've also appreciated the advancement that we've had since the days of Defender and Space Invaders and asteroids and those sort of things. I'm also a software developer. And I have a pretty good idea what's involved with game development. Again, I'm not an expert on that. But I got to thinking, actually a couple of years ago, that what would it take to utilize our current modern 3D game technology to help teach real-world photography? And I kind of mulled that over and did some research on it, and I got to a point where I decided to build a prototype to test whether or not that was a feasible approach to teaching real-world photography. One of the criteria that I realized was going to be necessary was a 3D game environment that would simulate a real-world environment. Now, what we have here in the prototype of what I call Project GBPL, which stands for Game-Based Photography Learning, we have a 3D game environment which simulates a city park. What we need here is a sense of depth. We need lines, patterns, various object placement. We need a variety of lighting. We need visual interest, all of which contribute to learning real-world photography. Another criteria that I realized was necessary for 3D game technology to be used for teaching photography would be that the game environment would need teaching tools integrated within the game environment. By teaching tools, I'm referring to text graphics that would be utilized to explain or describe some of the various principles of photography to help the learner, the gamer, the player, whatever you want to refer to them as, to be able to learn about and integrate into their learning experience the various principles of photography that are being demonstrated or taught within the game environment. Now, in keeping with this objective of having teaching tools integrated within the game environment, I've utilized an asset called ProDocument that's available up on the Unreal Engine marketplace. And what it enables me to do is have teaching content, teaching tools, text graphics that can be called up or made visible at the will of and discretion of the player. And the idea would be to have these teaching tools scattered about the 3D game environment in such a way that the player, the learner, is able to discover them, view them, digest them, and act upon them with perhaps a mission type of an approach to learning photography. Another criteria that I realized was going to be important was to have a believable character that the learner, the player, was able to control. Now, the concept of a believable character is simply to promote learner involvement in the process of learning photography. They actually have, or they control, a human-like character. Now, certainly the other advantage of having a human-like character would be that the learner, the player, is able to control the character to locate, position themselves so that various principles of photography can be discovered and practiced. Now, another criteria that I've realized concerning Project GBPL, or the objective of using 3D game technology to help teach real-world photography, I realized that the in-game camera must be able to closely simulate the behavior of a real-world camera. Now, keep in mind that what we're trying to do here is to utilize the 3D game environment to learn photography, or help learn photography. We're not trying to do in-game photography, often referred to as virtual photography. Now that changes the game considerably, because in a virtual photography situation, a photo mode, as it's often referred to, well, you know, the realism of the in-game camera isn't really that critical. But when you're trying to teach photography, the behavior of the in-game camera is very important so that it correctly or closely simulates what the learner, the gamer, the player, is going to find in a real-world camera. Now, I've found over the years that the camera is not really the point. It's really an instrument. It's a device that you use to do visual recording. And I found that if you don't understand the principles of photography, you're not really able to leverage the camera as an instrument very well. And then ultimately, if you don't know how to control the camera for purposes of visual recording, your camera tends to go into automatic mode, and the camera becomes a point and shoot. And that's not really what I'm interested in. I want people to be able to understand the principles of photography, the relationship, the exposure, the composition, being able to recognize various patterns within the scene, leading lines, vanishing points, that sort of thing. The principles of photography, how to deal with very high contrast situations where you have deep shadows and highlights. Those are the kinds of photography principles that I'm hoping that can be conveyed in a 3D game environment. And just to kind of conclude on this particular criteria, where the in-game camera, it's important that it be able to closely simulate the behavior of a real-world camera in order for what's learned within the 3D game environment to be translatable, applied to real-world photography. What I've observed as a photographer myself for most of my life is that the taking of a photograph is not learning photography. Ideally, it should be the activity that one does in practicing your knowledge, your skills of photography. So the point I'm making is that taking photos is not learning photography. However, once the image is taken, which the act of taking it is quickly forgotten, the image can be recalled, and it serves as a memory jogger. And then you could say, well, I remember where I was, and I remember that, and I remember the challenge that I had to get the depth of field right, and my goodness, the highlights were so bright that I had a rough time in dialing in the proper exposure to get a good... The point is that when you look the image over, you realize the challenges that you had when you were using the camera. The act of taking the photo is not the learning part, but it's really the review of the work that you have done that resulted from pressing the shutter button. So, in the project GBPL, I realized that it was going to be important for the images to be saved in such a way that the user can recall them and be able to reflect on what they were trying to do with that particular shot. What were they trying to learn? What was the point of picking that particular location, that particular composition? I'll wrap up devlog number 1 by referring to the last criteria on my list, which is that the principles of photography that are learned or taught within the game are directly translatable to real-world photography. Now, what that simply means is that the learner, the player, understands the concepts, the principles of photography, the theory that have been conveyed, taught within the game environment, persist to when the real camera is picked up in a real environment, and the principles and the theory of photography are recalled and applied to the real camera, the real photographic experience. Now, I believe that that is a super critical part of this whole project. The idea is that what you learn in the game can be applied with minimum effort to real-world camera in a real-world photography setting. I believe that that's what will make this project successful. Well, thank you for joining me in devlog number 1 of Project GBPL. I believe that the prototype that I've constructed using Unreal Engine 4.27, I believe that it does demonstrate that teaching photography within a 3D game environment is a feasible project. I believe it's feasible for because the criteria that I've laid out, I believe, are met. A realistic in-game camera that can simulate a real-world camera, I believe, is a critical part of this. The ability to embed teaching material within the game environment, I believe, is a very important criteria that I believe can be met. using the 3D game environment. I also believe that being able to capture and save images for later review in reflecting on what the learning effort was, and certainly for sharing. So I believe that this prototype does show that using 3D game technology to help teach photography, I believe that the prototype shows it is feasible. There's a lot more work to be done, of course. I'm certainly open to collaborators. I would love to see this project have a community that forms around it for purposes of discussion, contribution, and determining whether or not it's a project that could ever really become a viable product. Who knows? But I'm certainly open to discussion about it. I'm open to anybody who believes that they can contribute to the project, be it technically or from a photography teaching standpoint, or just a general interest in seeing something like this actually become successful. I'm open to those kind of discussions. Please feel free to join me up on Discord. Project GBPL is the Discord server's name. Feel free to come on up, poke around, listen in, and contribute. Thanks for joining me on Devlog number 1. Subscribe, and we'll get you notified on subsequent devlogs for Project GBPL. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.